What's up, guys? So today I will share with you a little move order that will be very annoying if your opponent plays the Sveshnikov. And let's say if you do find the Sveshnikov an annoying system to play against, with d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, e5. Even at the very top level, white has really struggled to be proving an advantage in this system that was actually one of my favorite systems as a junior. I played Sveshnikov all the time against e4 in the past. But let's say if you want to avoid that and maybe avoid a few annoying sidelines like the Kalashnikov and the Queen b6 Sicilian, this kind of thing, well then you might like the move order with knight to c3. The nice thing about knight c3 is that we still have the option to transpose back into an Open Sicilian. So if they go e6, we can go d4 and head back into Taimanov territory. If they play something such as d6, you can still go d4 and again head to classical Sicilian with knight to f6, which will likely be in your repertoire if you play Open Sicilian as white. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, do make sure to hit that subscribe button. If they play g6 again, you can go d4 and you are going to transpose into an accelerated dragon. Admittedly, you aren't able to play the move c4 on the Morochi bind this version, which is kind of the reason why accelerated is not considered a very good opening. But on the other hand, you do manage to avoid the Sveshnikov, because if they play knight to f6 here, well, we're not forced to play d4 and transpose back into this opening, but we can play bishop to b5. And basically move order black into an improved version of Rossolimo, where the insertion of knight f6 and knight c3 does favour white. And a big reason it favours white is because you're often able to go e5 and kick that knight away. So for example, knight d4, e5, take, knight d5, is actually a very promising line for white. After knight g5, you're already threatening moves like queen h5, or even better, queen f3 forking the knight and the pawn. And, well, I'm not going to go deeply into this position. It is a line where white is scoring 62% as a win rate in Elite Chess Opening Explorer. And the most common move, e6, is actually already a big mistake, because after knight e4, you're just going to jump in with a knight to d6 and completely murder black from there. So this is why knight d4 is probably not the best move for black. But if you go e6 and e5 is again going to cause black some problems. A structure like this is just absolutely a dream for white, where the c5 pawn is weak, and we're going to fix it as a weakness with c4 later. d6 is weak, so this is an example of what black is really trying to avoid, but this is also the two most common moves for black in this position, knight d4 and e6 in Elite Chess Explorer. So you can really start to feel how this is a pretty dangerous weapon for black. D6 again, e5 works quite well. Again, we're going to, double their pawns and just have a very pleasant positional advantage. Actually, I'm not sure which way you want to take, because they both look really good, but one of the better moves for black is to play g6, but there are a few good ways you can play. I kind of like the idea of just going e5 personally. Just, taking on c6 so they can't win the pawn. Takes h3, and there's a lot more theory to these positions, but, in general we can say that after, say, g4, it's not letting the knight get back into play. White's got a small but quite pleasant advantage here, where after d3 we're just ready to go bishop f4, queen e2, long castles, and kind of just nurse our space advantage, saying that neither of the black bishops are that great. The knight h6 is also, of course, very out of play in this position, so black definitely has some problems to solve here, and this is why, at a very high level, the main line, at least back when I was playing this system as a junior as black, was queen c7. But I stopped playing this because there were just too many annoying lines to deal with, and after knight d4, this move rook e1 is quite nice. Like, they don't really have time to take on b5, because then you just get too much for lead in development. So they normally play a6, and there's actually many good moves for white, like bishop to c4 is a nice dynamic approach, where you can often go knight d5, like say 8 d6, knight d5, and you can just get this really nice structure, where you put a lot of pressure on the e-pawn, and black's a little bit behind in development. If you want to play like Alireza Firouzja, he had some very nice games online with the move e5, where you sacrifice a little bit of material here. Or actually, are you even technically sacking a pawn? I suppose if you play dc3, you're sacking a pawn, but you could also, take, and play d-take c3, and you get a nice position with a lot of attacking chance against the black king. Probably if you're a computer, you play d6 and you can survive, but definitely from a human point of view, white's attacking setup is quite promising, and, like I said, Firouzja was generally going for dc3 and, sacking the pawn and trying to attack like this, which is probably objectively not very sound, but he won a lot of games with it, so definitely can be a dangerous weapon, let's say, if your opponent is not prepared. But objectively, I do think bishop c4 is the best move to get a stable positional advantage. If knight g4, e5 is a nice pawn sack that, advanced viewers of this video may like to explore. The lines get pretty fun, but would be a little bit of a tangent, admittedly. So, if the answer's not knight f6, then what can black do if they're a Sveshnikov player? Well, they could play a move like e5, just to stop d4. But then after bishop c4, they do have a bit of a weakness with this d5 square. And after d6, d3, and bishop e7, there's a more strategic position. Honestly, you don't really need to know a whole lot of theory to play this way as white, but the simplest approach is just to go knight d2, maneuver the knight to e3, and just get a good grip over that d5 square. So say knight f6, knight f1, castles. This is not the absolute best way for black to play, but it's a pretty typical sort of position, where you can just put your knight on d5, play f4 to, attack the black structure. If they go a6, just a4 is, just making sure that they're not getting counterplay on the queen side. And you get a small but pretty stable advantage here with the white pieces. Actually, maybe it's even better to play knight c to d5, so if they do play knight d4, well then in that case you'd be able to kick their knight away with c3. This is a small but I think quite important difference. Also in this exact position you could go a5 and, just kill their pawn on b7, but okay, that's a little bit of a different story. Well, as we can see, we don't have to worry too much about e5. If they do play, let's say, bishop e7 and, they delay to move d6, you can still play knight d2 because they're almost certainly going to play d6 anyway here on the next move for a very similar type of position. So I'm personally not too concerned about e5. You get a small but pretty pleasant advantage thanks to that d5 square. I do think it's worth going a little bit deeper into the move g6 though, because like I said, if you normally would play the Marocci bind in the Open Sicilian, then this does avoid that. But there are a few decent options that white can play. The main line is just to go bishop e3, knight f6, bishop to c4, and potentially transpose back into the Yugoslav attack of the dragon after d6, f3. Like, if you normally played bishop c, this Yugoslav attack, if they played a dragon in the Open Sicilian, then this is a pretty easy way to just transpose into it. Of course, black could play a few alternatives, like moves like a5, e6, rook e8, are a thing, but it's not going to massively change the nature of the play, except that maybe in some lines you'll castle short rather than long when black doesn't play the usual dragon setup. But let's say if you don't have this in your repertoire and you want to avoid getting move ordered, then a quite reasonable alternative for white is just to play a move like knight d2, and after knight f6 just to play g3 and just play this fin up, actually in a very similar way to a very recent video that I showed with this system, against the King's Indian attack with d5, g6, and trying to get into e5 push. We're actually doing something pretty similar here, just with colors reversed. White's plan's going to be to play moves like a4, just hold up black's queenside play. You'll often play moves like h3 and bishop e3 as well, just to avoid knight g4. And in the middle game, you're going to put your knight on d5, trying to get knight d5, ed5, and get that very nice pawn structure with the pressure down to e-file. I know it's a lot of arrows, but, I do have somewhere to get to as well. But in any case, this does give you a pretty clear idea of this anti-Sveshnikov system against, against c5, knight c6, where you can play knight c3, and only then play to move d4 and move later, like if they don't play knight f6, as a way to just avoid the Sveshnikov altogether. And like we saw this line with bishop b5, this improved Rossolimo does give white a small advantage with best play. You could also even consider playing other move orders as well, but I think this is the simplest one for an Open Sicilian player who just wants to avoid the Sveshnikov and then otherwise get into their normal Open Sicilian systems. Anyway, do let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are about this knight c3 anti-Sveshnikov, and I'll see you guys in the next training video. Until then, take care.